History often chooses its heroes selectively. It remembers the people who fit the story neatly, the people who fit the painting, the people whose image can be framed without too much discomfort. But every so often, history produces a figure so vivid, so fearless, and so undeniably useful in a moment of suffering that even the barriers of race, empire, class, and convention cannot fully keep her out of memory. Mary Seacole was one of those figures. She was not born into the world that usually produced Victorian heroines. She was born in Kingston, Jamaica, in 1805, the daughter of a Scottish soldier and a free black or mixed-race Jamaican woman known as a doctress, a healer who used traditional Caribbean and African herbal knowledge alongside practical nursing skill. From that beginning, Mary learned medicine not in a formal school, but in the hard school of lived experience, treating illness, observing patients, but understanding that healing often begins long before a doctor arrives. Britannica notes that she drew on this background throughout her life, and that her mother kept a boarding house where invalid soldiers were also cared for, giving Mary early exposure to caregiving and military patients alike. That origin matters, because Mary Seacole did not become a heroine by accident in the Crimea. She became one because long before the war, she had already built the instincts that war would later demand. She grew up in a colonial world of movement, trade, disease, and empire. Jamaica, in the early 19th century, was not a calm place untouched by global power. It was deeply bound to the British imperial system, with all the violence, inequality, and mobility that system created. In that environment, Mary learned how quickly illness could spread, and how vital practical treatment could be when formal institutions failed. According to Britannica, she also traveled widely in adulthood, visiting places including Panama and Britain, and gained first-hand experience treating victims of epidemics, such as cholera and yellow fever. This is one of the most important truths about her story. Mary Seacole did not arrive at the Crimean War as an amateur improvising compassion for the first time. She arrived as a woman who had already tested herself against disease. She had seen suffering. She had treated patients in difficult conditions. She had built a reputation for resourcefulness. The Mary Seacole Trust and Britannica both emphasized that her skills were rooted in real medical and nursing practice, shaped across years, places, and epidemics. And those years mattered, because the 19th century was an age when disease could destroy armies as efficiently as bullets. That is what makes the Crimean War such a brutal and revealing stage for her story. The Crimean War fought mainly between Russia and an alliance of Britain, France, and the Ottoman Empire, lasted from 1853 to 1856, and became notorious, not only for battlefield losses, but for logistical breakdown, poor sanitation, and appalling medical conditions. Britannica describes the war as a major conflict centered on the Crimean Peninsula, while the National Army Museum notes the horrific unsanitary conditions facing soldiers, and the medical innovations that the war would eventually help stimulate. When British newspapers began reporting on the suffering of soldiers, Mary Seacole did what people like her do in moments of crisis. She decided to go, not because anyone invited her, not because a powerful patron cleared a path, not because the system had a place ready for her. She went because she believed she could help. By late 1854, Mary traveled to London and offered her services as a nurse for the war effort. The National Army Museum states that she came to London to volunteer as an army nurse, and multiple sources note that she was rejected by the War Office and also turned away when she sought to join the nursing efforts associated with Florence Nightingale. Mary herself later believed racial prejudice played a part in those refusals. The Mary Seacole Trust describes her as a woman who overcame racism and injustice to nurse soldiers during the Crimean War. This is where the shape of her heroism becomes clear. A lot of people want to help when the path is open. Fewer keep going when the gate is closed in their face. Mary Seacole kept going. She did not allow rejection to define either her value or her purpose. Instead, she turned away from the bureaucracy and towards self-determination. If official Britain would not send her, she would send herself. That decision is the hinge of her whole story. Had she accepted refusal as final, she might have vanished into obscurity. Instead, She made one of the boldest choices in 19th century war history. She financed her own journey to the conflict. The National Army Museum explicitly says that after being rejected, she paid her own passage to the war. That one fact tells you almost everything you need to know about her character. Mary Seacole was not asking history for permission. She was a middle-aged, mixed-race woman from Jamaica in the high age of empire. She lacked the institutional backing, aristocratic protection, and racial privilege that made some other women easier for Britain to celebrate. Yet she crossed continents anyway. She traveled to the Crimea in 1855, determined to do the work whether the establishment approved or not. And when she got there, she did not simply join an existing structure. She built one. Near Balaclava, Mary Seacole established what became known as the British Hotel. Despite the name, it was not a luxury refuge in the modern sense. It functioned as a store, canteen, rest space, and practical base from which she could provide food, supplies, and medical assistance to British soldiers. The National Army Museum's educational materials specifically identify her British Hotel as the place where soldiers could relax and buy supplies, while broader biographical accounts emphasize that her work combined nursing, provisioning, while direct battlefield care. This is a detail people sometimes misunderstand. Mary Seacole did not become famous because she ran a shop near the war. She became famous because she turned that base into a lifeline. Soldiers needed more than surgery. They needed food. They needed medicine. They needed rest. They needed human attention in a war that could strip men of dignity as quickly as it stripped them of health. Mary provided all of that. She cooked for soldiers. She prepared remedies. She offered practical care in a setting where official systems were often overwhelmed, slow, or badly organized, or badly organized, or badly organized. And Dolwine War, she became known for her homemade medicines and for moving toward danger rather than away from it. The National Army Museum notes that she frequently rode out to dispense medicine and food to those in need. That matters because it shows she was not simply waiting safely behind the lines for patients to come to her. She was going out toward the wounded. And this is why soldiers remembered her, not just because she was kind, but because she was there. In war, presence is everything. The person who appears when pain is immediate becomes unforgettable. The person who arrives with help when institutions fail becomes part of memory in a way official titles never quite manage. Mary Seacole became that kind of presence. She was known among soldiers as Mother Seacole, a name that tells us something about how she was perceived, not merely as a vendor, not merely as a nurse, but as a figure of reassurance in a landscape of fear and deprivation. Britannica notes that she provided sustenance and care for British soldiers at the battlefront, which is exactly the combination that made her so important. She was not a symbol floating above suffering. She was physically embedded in it. The Crimean War was full of misery, poor shelter, murder, cold, disease, overstretched services, men dying not only from enemy fire, but from infection, malnutrition, and neglect. This context matters because it explains why Mary's practical courage had such force. In a war infamous for medical and logistical disaster, any person capable of reducing suffering became extraordinary. The National Army Museum directly links the Crimean War with horrific unsanitary conditions that pushed innovations in medical care. Mary Seacole became a heroine inside exactly that crisis. And unlike many respectable Victorian women, she did not remain confined to what society considered proper female distance from violence. She went close. Accounts associated with her legacy, including BBC educational materials and National Army Museum resources, describe her tending wounded soldiers and courageously working near the battlefield. She was associated not only with nursing from the British Hotel, but with riding out and assisting the sick and injured in dangerous areas. In other words, her reputation was built not on carefully staged charity, but on visible bravery in a war zone. That visibility mattered, because heroism is not only about what you do, it is also about who sees you do it. British soldiers saw Mary Seacole. They saw a woman who had crossed from Jamaica to London to Crimea after being rejected. They saw a woman who had spent her own money to come to them. They saw a woman who seemed immune to the social logic that told her to stay in her place. And when men in uniform, far from home, sick, frightened, and often badly served by official structures, encountered someone who fed them, treated them, and showed up again and again, gratitude became devotion. That is how Mary Seacole became a heroine. Not through propaganda, not through office, not through government endorsement, through usefulness under fire. It is one of the purest forms of reputation a person can earn. And yet there is another layer to her story that makes it even more powerful. Mary Seacole became a heroine despite the world she lived in. Victorian Britain was not eager to elevate a mixed-race Jamaican woman to national importance. Empire could celebrate black and colonized subjects when it found them convenient, but it rarely did so on equal terms. Even when admiration came, it could be unstable, conditional, and framed through exoticism. The Mary Seacole Trust explicitly places racism and injustice at the center of her story, and the fact that she had to self-fund her path to service underlines that point. That tension explains why her later memory became so uneven. During and just after the war, Mary Seacole was widely known. Her fame among soldiers and sections of the British public was real. After the war ended, however, she returned to England in poor health and financial difficulty. Britannica notes that she came back poor and ill, and BBC educational material likewise describes her as later impoverished and underappreciated. Her war fame had been genuine, but fame does not always protect people once the crisis ends and the public moves on. There is something painfully familiar in that pattern. Society applauds the helper in the emergency, then forgets her when the emergency is over. Mary Seacole had given her labor, money, courage, and health to the war effort. But when peace arrived, she did not step into a secure national reward. Instead, she faced debt and hardship. Public support had to be raised on her behalf, and a festival was later held to honor her contributions and assist her financially. Britannica records that funds were raised in recognition of her service, and that she received decorations from France, England, and Turkey. Even then, she refused to vanish quietly. In 1857, she published her autobiography, Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, which Britannica describes as a bestseller. That book matters enormously because it gave Mary Seacole something many women like her were denied: a voice in the historical record. Instead of existing only through other people's praise or prejudice, she narrated herself. She told the story of her travels, her work, her business life, her medical practice, and her experience in the Crimea. That act was a kind of second heroism, because to write yourself into history when history is not designed to preserve you is an act of resistance. Mary Seacole understood that reputation is fragile. She understood that public memory can shift, distort, or disappear. So she did what many unsung people never had the chance to do. She left her own version behind. That is one reason we can still see her today as more than an anecdote. We can see her as a traveler, healer, entrepreneur, and war heroine whose life exceeded the narrow categories assigned to her. And still, and after her death in 1881, much of that memory faded. For decades, Mary Seacole slipped into relative obscurity. Britannica notes that after her death, she fell into obscurity before being rediscovered later. This is crucial to understanding her legacy. She was not continuously honored in the way some Victorian reform figures were. Her story had to be recovered. Why? Partly because empires often remember selectively. Partly because racial prejudice affects who becomes canonical. Partly because nursing history itself was simplified into more comfortable narratives, centered on a smaller set of names. And partly because Mary Seacole was difficult to place neatly. She was not only a nurse, she was a businesswoman, a traveler, a colonial subject, a mixed-race woman with practical medicine, rooted partly outside formal European institutions. Her story was too complicated for easy memorial packaging. But obscurity was not the end. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, Mary Seacole's story returned with force. Britannica notes that in 2004, she took first place in the 100 Great Black Britons poll in the United Kingdom. The Mary Seacole Trust emphasizes that a statue of her was unveiled at St. Thomas Hospital in London in 2016, so that she would never again be lost to history. These are not minor symbolic gestures. They show a society revisiting its own memory and asking why a woman so admired in wartime had been allowed to fade so far from view. And that brings us to the deeper question. What exactly made Mary Seacole a heroine of the Crimean War? It was not simply that she was present in Crimea. Many people were present. It was not simply that she cared about the wounded. Others cared too. It was the combination: experience before the war, determination after rejection, self-funded commitment, practical medical skill, courage near the front, food, medicine. Without real-life social describe different, comes the do, way you social, chode you soch the seeking, and comfort under terrible conditions, and the ability to make soldiers feel seen as human beings in a system that too often treated them as expendable. That combination made her unforgettable. There is also a reason her story continues to resonate now. Mary Seacole breaks the neat categories that history likes to impose. She was Jamaican and British Imperial at once. She was a healer and a businesswoman. She was maternal in reputation, but fiercely independent in action. She cared for soldiers, yet refused to wait for military permission to be useful. She worked in a world structured by racism and still forced that world to acknowledge her value. That is why she feels modern, even while standing firmly in the 19th century. Her story is about race, gender, empire, medicine, memory, frontline, and self-making all at once. And perhaps that is why comparisons with other Crimean figures never fully capture her. Mary Seacole does not need to be important only in contrast to someone else. Her life stands on its own terms. She became a heroine not because she won a contest of reputations, but because in one of the most miserable wars of the century, she crossed oceans, built a base of care, repeatedly moved towards suffering when others might have withdrawn. The National Army Museum's summary is simple and telling. She was famous for her homemade cures and frequently rode out to dispense medicine and food to those in need. That sentence contains the whole character. Famous for cures, riding out, medicine and food, those in need. It is a portrait of action, and action is the truest language of heroism. By the time the Crimean War ended, Mary Seacole had become part of the emotional memory of the conflict for many British soldiers. Her care was practical, personal, and immediate. She did not heal the entire broken system of wartime medicine. No single person could, but for the men she reached, she changed the lived reality of war. She made agony more bearable. She made abandonment feel less absolute. She made care visible. That is enough to earn the title, heroine. More than enough. And maybe the final lesson of her story is this. Heroism does not always come from the center of power. Sometimes it comes from the person power rejected, the person institution underestimated, the person who refused to wait for permission to do what was necessary. Mary Seacole was that person. Born in Jamaica, shaped by healing traditions and experience, tested by epidemics, turned away by the British establishment. She answered war not with bitterness, but with motion. She went anyway. She built anyway. She cared anyway. And when soldiers remembered the Crimea, many remembered not only battles and blunders. At the bore, women who had come to them with remedies, meals, courage, bite, presents. So yes, Mary Seacole became a heroine of the Crimean War, but she also became something larger, a challenge to narrow history, a reminder that compassion can be brave, a reminder that usefulness can be revolutionary, a reminder that people pushed to the margins can still define the moral center of a crisis. And that may be the most enduring part of her legacy, because every age has people who are told no. Every age has gates that close. Every age has institutions that fail to recognize talent when it stands before them. Mary Seacole's answer to that world was unforgettable. She did not disappear. She went where she was needed. And history, eventually, had no choice but to follow.